The letter burned in Eli's hand, its edges creased from nights of rereading, each word a blade. "You're no son of ours." At 17, he stood at the edge of Willow Creek, Ohio, the town's only bus stop, a cruel spotlight under the fading sun. His parents' rejection had gutted him, but it was their silence afterward that broke him. Eli's sneakers scuffed the gravel as he shifted his weight, the backpack slung over his shoulder, holding everything he owned. A few shirts, a dog-eared copy of Giovanni's Room, and a photo of his younger sister, Mia, who'd cried when he was sent away. The bus was late, or maybe it wasn't coming at all, just like the hope he clung to that his parents might change their minds. He was gay, and to them, that was a sin too heavy to forgive. An old pickup truck rattled to a stop beside him, its engine coughing like it held a grudge. The driver, a man with silver hair and a face carved by time, leaned out the window. "You Eli?" His voice was gravelly, warm, like a fire on a cold night. Eli nodded, wary. "I'm Amos, your grandpa's old friend. He said you might need a place to crash." Eli hadn't seen his grandfather in years, not since the family cut ties after Grandpa Joe defended him at a tense Christmas dinner. Now, Grandpa Joe was gone, and Amos, a stranger with kind eyes, was offering a lifeline. Eli hesitated, then climbed into the truck, the letter still clutched in his hand. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would rewrite his life. Amos's farmhouse was a creaking relic on the edge of town, surrounded by fields that stretched into the horizon. The walls were lined with photos of a younger Amos and Joe, laughing in fishing boats or toasting beers at county fairs. Eli's room was small, with a quilt that smelled of cedar and a window overlooking a sagging barn. "Ain't much," Amos said, setting down a mug of coffee, "but it's yours." That first night, Eli lay awake, the weight of rejection pressing against his chest. He'd grown up in a town where faggot was slung like a weapon, where church sermons preached love but practiced hate. Coming out to his parents had been a desperate bid for honesty, but their response, kicking him out with a Bible verse in a suitcase, had shattered him. Now, in this stranger's home, he felt like a ghost, untethered, waiting to fade. Amos, though, was different. He didn't pry, didn't preach. Over breakfast, he'd talk about the farm, the weather, or the time he and Joe stole a neighbor's tractor for a joyride. Eli listened, guarded at first, but Amos's stories had a way of sneaking past his defenses. One morning, as they fixed a fence under a bruising summer sun, Amos asked, "You ever think about what you want, kid? Not what they told you to want. What you want." Eli froze, the question a mirror he wasn't ready to face. "I don't know," he muttered, hammer in hand. "Maybe just to be okay." Amos nodded, like he understood more than Eli said. "Takes time," he replied, "but you'll get there." Weeks turned into months, and the farmhouse became a refuge. Eli helped with chores, learned to drive the tractor, and started sketching again, something he hadn't done since his parents burned his old drawings. Amos noticed, hanging one of Eli's sketches, a vibrant pride flag against a stormy sky, on the fridge. "Got talent, kid," he said, and Eli's chest ached with something like hope. But Willow Creek wasn't kind. At the diner where Eli picked up a part-time job, whispers followed him. "That's the kid Amos took in," they'd say, eyes sharp with judgment. "Heard he's, you know." Eli kept his head down, but the words stung. He wasn't just the new kid. He was the gay kid, an outsider in a town that loved its traditions more than its people. One evening, a guy named Caleb walked into the diner. He was tall, with chestnut curls and a leather jacket that looked like it had stories of its own. He sat at the counter, ordered a milkshake, and grinned at Eli like he didn't care about the town's gossip. "You're new," Caleb said, his voice smooth, teasing. "Heard you're living with old man Amos. Bet he's got you hauling hay bales." Eli laughed, caught off guard. Something like that. Caleb's ease disarmed him, and for the first time in months, Eli felt seen, not as a scandal, but as himself. They talked until closing about music, movies, the way the stars look brighter out here. When Caleb left, he slipped Eli a note with his number. "Call me," It read, and Eli's heart raced. Their first date was at a drive-in theater, a beat-up screen in a field showing The Breakfast Club. Caleb's hand brushed Eli's in the dark, and when their fingers intertwined, Eli felt a spark he'd never known. But love in Willow Creek came with a cost. The next day, someone spray-painted FAG on Amos's barn. Eli stared at the word, shame and fury twisting inside him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but Amos just handed him a paint can. "Ain't your fault," he said. "People fear what they don't understand." Amos's words stayed with Eli, but so did the town's cruelty. As he and Caleb grew closer, stolen moments in the woods or late-night drives became their sanctuary. Caleb, who'd grown up in Willow Creek but left for college, told Eli stories of a world beyond, cities where pride flags flew openly, where love didn't have to hide. Eli clung to those stories, but doubt gnawed at him. Could he ever escape the weight of rejection? By the end of summer, Eli was falling hard. Caleb was reckless, passionate, unafraid to hold Eli's hand in public, even when it drew stares. But their happiness was fragile. One night, at a bonfire party, a group of guys cornered Eli, their words slurred with beer and hate. "You don't belong here," one spat, shoving him. Caleb stepped in, fists clenched, but Amos's truck pulled up before things escalated. "Get in," Amos said, his voice calm but unyielding. The ride home was silent, but Amos's hand on Eli's shoulder said enough. Back at the farmhouse, Amos poured 2 glasses of whiskey. "World's tough, kid," he said, his eyes distant. "But you're tougher. Don't let him make you small." Eli nodded, tears burning his eyes. He wanted to believe Amos, but the town's hatred felt like a tide pulling him under. As fall approached, Amos's cough worsened. Eli noticed the way he tired faster, the way his hands shook pouring coffee. Just old age. Amos brushed it off, but Eli wasn't convinced. He started cooking dinners, taking over more chores, anything to ease the man who'd given him a home. One night, Amos handed Eli a letter, not unlike the one from his parents, but this one was different. "Joe wrote this for you," Amos said, "before he passed. Said to give it to you when you were ready." Eli's hands trembled as he opened it. His grandfather's handwriting was shaky but clear. "Eli, you're stronger than you know. Love who you love, and don't let anyone tell you it's wrong. I'm proud of you." Tears fell as Eli read, Amos watching quietly. For the first time, Eli felt anchored, like he could face the world. But then Amos collapsed. The hospital was a sterile maze of beeping monitors and antiseptic air, a stark contrast to the warmth of Amos's farmhouse. Eli sat by the old man's bedside, his sketchbook abandoned on the floor, the pencil lines smudged from his restless hands. Amos lay pale against the starched sheets, his breathing shallow, a machine tracking the stubborn rhythm of his heart. It was pneumonia, the doctor said, complicated by years of hard living and a body too stubborn to quit. Eli hadn't left the hospital in 2 days, sleeping in the hard plastic chair, his world narrowing to the rise and fall of Amos's chest. Caleb brought coffee and sandwiches, his presence a quiet anchor, but even he couldn't ease the dread coiling in Eli's gut. Amos was the closest thing to family he had left, and the thought of losing him was a wound too raw to name. "You should rest," Caleb murmured, his hand warm on Eli's shoulder. They were in the hospital cafeteria, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows. Eli shook his head, staring at the cold coffee in his cup. "I can't," he said, voice cracking. "He took me in when no one else would." Eli stopped, the words too heavy to finish. Caleb leaned closer, his eyes fierce with conviction. "He's a fighter, Eli, like you." But the words felt hollow against the memory of Amos's frail form, the man who'd taught him to fix fences now tethered to tubes and wires. Eli wanted to believe Caleb, wanted to cling to hope, but fear was louder. Back in Amos's room, Eli found a photo tucked in the old man's wallet. A younger Amos and Grandpa Joe, arms slung around each other, grinning under a wide Montana sky. Eli traced the faded edges, wondering about the life Amos had lived, the stories he hadn't told. "You gotta wake up," Eli whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of machines. "I'm not ready to do this without you." The next morning, Amos stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and a faint smile cracked his weathered face. "You look like hell, kid," he rasped, and Eli laughed through tears, relief flooding him. But the recovery was fragile. The doctor warned that Amos needed rest, maybe months, and the farmhouse wasn't equipped for it. Eli felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He'd have to care for Amos, keep the farm running, all while dodging the town's venom. Willow Creek hadn't softened. The graffiti on the barn had been painted over, but the whispers at the diner grew sharper. Eli overheard them while wiping down tables. "Amos is sick because of that kid's sin. They're both trouble." Each word was a needle, but Eli kept working, saving every penny for Amos's medical bills. Caleb helped where he could, sneaking moments with Eli behind the diner or driving him to the hospital. But their time together was stolen, always shadowed by the town's judgment. One night, Caleb pulled Eli into the woods behind the farmhouse, where fireflies blinked like tiny stars. "Run away with me," Caleb said, his voice urgent, his hands framing Eli's face. "We could go to Chicago, New York, somewhere we don't have to hide." Eli's heart leapt, but doubt anchored him. "What about Amos?" he asked. "I can't leave him." Caleb's eyes softened, but there was a flicker of frustration too. "You're allowed to want something for yourself, Eli." The words echoed Amos's question from months ago, but they felt heavier now. Eli wanted Caleb, wanted a life where love didn't come with a fight, but abandoning Amos was unthinkable. They kissed under the fireflies, a desperate promise, but the tension lingered. Caleb was restless, a dreamer ready to run. Eli was tethered, bound by loyalty and fear. Amos was discharged a week later, weaker but stubborn as ever. Eli turned the farmhouse into a makeshift recovery ward, cooking bland soups and reading aloud from Amos's old westerns. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, Amos grabbed Eli's hand. "You're a good kid," he said, his voice thick. "Joe would have been proud." Eli's throat tightened, and he nodded, unable to speak. But the town's cruelty didn't pause for Amos's recovery. A petition circulated demanding Eli leave Willow Creek, claiming he was a disruption. It was led by Pastor Reynolds, whose sermons had fueled Eli's parents' rejection. Eli found the petition pinned to the diner's bulletin board, his name scrawled like a curse. He tore it down, hands shaking, but the damage was done. That night, someone slashed the tires on Amos's truck. Caleb was furious, ready to confront the town, but Eli stopped him. "It won't change anything," he said, exhaustion seeping into his bones. Caleb's eyes flashed. "You can't keep taking this, Eli. You deserve better." The words stung because they were true, but Eli didn't know how to fight a town that hated him for existing. Amos, though, had other plans. One evening, he called Eli to the porch, where the air smelled of rain and hay. "I've been thinking," Amos said, his voice steady despite his frailty. "This town's got its claws in you, but it don't own you. Joe left you something, more than that letter." He handed Eli a key, small and rusted, tied to a leather cord. "There's a cabin up in the hills, Joe's old place. It's yours now. Might be a good place to start over." Eli turned the key over in his hand, the weight of it grounding him. A cabin, a fresh start. Hope flickered, but so did fear. Could he leave Amos? Could he ask Caleb to stay? The questions churned as Amos watched him, eyes full of quiet faith. "You'll figure it out, kid," he said. "You always do." But the next morning, Amos didn't wake up. The funeral was held in Willow Creek's only church, a squat building with stained glass that seemed to mock Eli's grief. Amos's casket sat at the altar, draped in a simple cloth, surrounded by flowers that couldn't mask the town's hypocrisy. Eli stood in the back, Caleb at his side, as Pastor Reynolds droned about salvation, never mentioning the man who'd taken in a rejected boy without question. Eli's hands shook as he clutched the key Amos had given him, its edges biting into his palm. The pews were half empty. Most of Willow Creek had stayed away, their absence louder than their whispers. Those who came shot Eli glances, some pitying, some hostile. He wanted to scream, to demand they see Amos for who he was, kind, stubborn, a man who'd chosen love over judgment. Instead, he stood silent, drowning in loss. Caleb's hand found his, a quiet defiance in the squeeze of his fingers. "You okay?" he whispered. Eli shook his head, unable to speak. Amos had been his anchor, and now he was gone, leaving Eli adrift in a town that wanted him erased. The service ended, and people shuffled out, avoiding Eli's gaze. Only Mrs. Carter, the diner's cook, approached, her eyes soft. "Amos was proud of you," she said, pressing a casserole dish into his hands. "Don't let this town tell you otherwise." Back at the farmhouse, Eli wandered through rooms that felt too big without Amos's gravelly laugh. Caleb tried to help, packing dishes, sorting papers, but the silence was suffocating. That night, Eli found a box in Amos's closet, filled with letters, photos, and a journal in Joe's handwriting. The journal was a revelation. Pages of Grandpa Joe's life, his love for a man named Thomas, their secret kept from a world that wouldn't understand. Joe had been gay too, and Amos had been his confidant, his protector. Eli read until dawn, tears staining the pages. Joe's words were a mirror, his fears, his joys, his fight to be himself. One entry, dated years ago, mentioned Eli. "He's got a spark, Amos. If the world tries to dim it, don't let it." Eli closed the journal, his chest tight with grief and gratitude. Amos hadn't just given him a home. He'd carried Joe's legacy, shielding Eli when his own family wouldn't. The next day, Eli visited the lawyer handling Amos's estate. The farmhouse was his, along with the cabin in the hills and a small savings account. "Amos wanted you taken care of," the lawyer said, handing Eli a sealed envelope. Inside was a note in Amos's scrawl, "Live your truth, kid. Don't you let you, Ingwe." Eli's resolve hardened. He wouldn't let Willow Creek break him. But the town had other plans. The petition to oust Eli gained traction, fueled by Pastor Reynolds and a handful of locals who saw him as a stain on their values. At the diner, someone left a Bible open to Leviticus on his table, a silent threat. Caleb was ready to fight, his anger a fire Eli both loved and feared. "We could leave," Caleb said one night, sprawled on the farmhouse couch. "Start over somewhere new. Together." Eli wanted it. God, he wanted it. But the cabin key hung heavy around his neck. Amos and Joe had fought for their place here, and running felt like betraying them. "I need to stay," he said, voice breaking. "At least for now." Caleb's face fell, but he nodded, pulling Eli close. "Then we stay," he whispered, but Eli heard the strain in his voice. The cabin became Eli's refuge. Tucked in the hills, it was a small, weathered place with creaking floors and windows that framed the stars. Eli spent weekends there, sketching, reading Joe's journal, finding pieces of himself in the quiet. Caleb joined him when he could, their nights filled with laughter and love, but the town's shadow never fully lifted. One evening, a rock crashed through the cabin's window, a note tied to it, "Leave or else." Eli's hands shook as he showed Caleb the note. "This is my home," he said, anger edging out fear. Caleb's eyes blazed. "Then we fight for it." They reported the incident to the sheriff, a gruff man who'd known Amos and took the threat seriously. But the vandalism didn't stop. Slashed tires, more graffiti, anonymous letters. Eli felt the walls closing in, his dream of a safe haven slipping away. One night, Eli found a letter slipped under the farmhouse door, not hateful but curious, from a teenager named Sam. "I saw you at the diner. I think I might be like you. How do you keep going?" Eli's heart ached. Sam was him, years ago, scared and searching. He wrote back, pouring out his truth. "It's hard, but you're not alone. Find people who see you." He left the letter in Sam's mailbox, and signed, a small act of defiance. Caleb, though, was growing restless. "You can't save everyone, Eli," he said after another long day at the diner. "This town doesn't deserve you." Eli knew he was right, but leaving felt like surrender. The cabin, Amos, Joe, they were roots he couldn't uproot. Not yet. Then the fire happened. The smoke was visible from town, a black plume curling into the dawn sky. Eli's heart stopped when he saw it. The cabin's location unmistakable. He and Caleb raced up the hill, the old truck rattling as Eli's mind churned with panic. The cabin, Joe's cabin, his sanctuary, was burning. By the time they arrived, flames licked the wooden walls, the roof half collapsed. Firefighters were already there, battling the blaze, but Eli knew it was too late. His sketches, Joe's journal, the fragments of a life he was building, all gone. Caleb pulled him back from the heat, his arms a tether as Eli's knees buckled. "It's not your fault," Caleb said, but Eli's guilt was a wildfire of its own. The sheriff ruled it arson. No suspects, no proof, but Eli knew. The rock through the window, the slashed tires, the petition, it was all connected. Willow Creek wanted him gone, and they'd torched his refuge to prove it. Standing in the ashes, Eli felt the weight of every hateful word, every sidelong glance. He wanted to scream, to fight, but grief choked him. Caleb was a storm of rage. "We're done here," he said, his voice sharp as they stood in the farmhouse kitchen. "They could have killed you, Eli. We're leaving." But Eli shook his head, the cabin's key still around his neck, now a reminder of what he'd lost. "I can't run," he said. "Amos didn't. Joe didn't." Caleb's jaw tightened. "And look where it got them." The words cut deep, but Eli couldn't argue. Amos was gone, Joe was a memory, and the cabin was ash. Still, something stubborn in him refused to break. He thought of Sam's letter, of the kid out there needing hope. "I'm staying," Eli said, his voice steady for the first time. Caleb stared at him, then walked out, the door slamming behind him. Eli didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch, staring at the stars, wondering if he'd made the right choice. Caleb's absence was a wound, but so was the thought of abandoning Amos's legacy. The next morning, Mrs. Carter showed up with a thermos of coffee and a fierce look. "Heard about the fire," she said. "You're not alone, Eli. Some of us are on your side." Her words sparked something. Eli started talking, to Sam, to Mrs. Carter, to the few allies he had. He organized a meeting at the diner after hours, expecting a handful of people. Instead, a dozen showed up. Sam, a shy kid with glasses, Mrs. Carter's niece, who'd left the church, even the sheriff, who'd grown up with Amos. They talked about the fire, the petition, the town's hatred. Sam spoke up, voice trembling. "I don't want to hide who I am anymore." Eli saw himself in Sam's fear, his courage. He stood, heart pounding. "Then we don't hide," he said. "We fight for our place here." The group agreed to push back, petitions of their own, letters to the local paper, a quiet rebellion against Willow Creek's bigotry. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Caleb came back the next day, his eyes red-rimmed. "I'm sorry," he said, pulling Eli into a hug. "I was scared for you." Eli clung to him, relief and love tangling together. "We can fight together," Eli said, and Caleb nodded, his hand finding Eli's. They were a team again, but the road ahead was steep. The town council meeting was their first battle. Pastor Reynolds stood at the podium, railing against immorality, his eyes locked on Eli. But Eli stood too, his voice shaking but clear. "I'm not here to change your beliefs," he said. "I'm here to live. Amos took me in when my own family didn't. This town is my home, and I'm not leaving." Some council members shifted uncomfortably, others glared. But Sam's mother, a quiet woman who'd never spoken publicly, stood next. "My son deserves to feel safe here," she said. The room went silent, the weight of her words shifting something. The petition to oust Eli was tabled, not defeated but delayed. Eli and Caleb drove to the cabin's ruins that night, the stars bright above the blackened timbers. Eli knelt, sifting through ash, and found a scorched page of Joe's journal, the words barely legible. Love is worth fighting for. He tucked it into his pocket, a talisman. We'll rebuild, he told Caleb, who kissed his forehead. Together. But the fight wasn't over. A new letter arrived, and signed, chilling, "You'll regret staying." The letter lay on the farmhouse table, its words a cold fist around Eli's heart. You'll regret staying. No signature, no return address, just hate inked in block letters. Caleb wanted to burn it, but Eli kept it, a reminder of what they were up against. Willow Creek's venom wasn't done with them. Eli threw himself into the fight. He and Sam started a support group, meeting weekly at the diner, a safe space for kids like them, queer, questioning, or just different. Mrs. Carter baked cookies, and the sheriff stopped by, his presence a quiet shield. The group grew, a small rebellion in a town that thrived on conformity. Sam came out to his mom, tears and hugs sealing their bond, and Eli felt a flicker of pride. He was making a difference, even if it was just one kid at a time. But the threats didn't stop. A brick shattered the diner's window, a note tied to it. Fags don't belong. The sheriff investigated, but no one talked. Eli's sketches, once vibrant, grew darker. Storm clouds, broken fences, faces half hidden in shadow. Caleb noticed, pulling him close one night in the farmhouse. "You're carrying too much," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Let me help." Eli wanted to, but guilt gnawed at him. The fire, the threats, it all felt like his fault, a consequence of existing. Caleb's dreams of leaving clashed with Eli's need to stay, and the tension between them simmered. One night, after a long day of rebuilding the cabin's foundation, Caleb snapped. "Why are we doing this, Eli? This town hates us. We could be happy somewhere else." Eli's hands stilled on the hammer. "This is my home," he said, voice raw. "Amos gave it to me. Joe did too." Caleb's eyes softened, but his frustration lingered. "I love you," he said, "but I don't know how much more I can take." The words hung between them, a crack in their foundation. The cabin rebuild was slow, funded by Eli's savings and donations from allies like Mrs. Carter. Each nail driven into the new frame felt like defiance, but the threats kept coming. Slashed tires, more letters, a dead bird left on the porch. Eli reported each one, but the sheriff's hands were tied without evidence. "Be careful," he warned, his face grim. "Some folks here don't let go." Eli found solace in Joe's scorched journal page, reading it nightly. Love is worth fighting for. He clung to it, but doubt crept in. Was he fighting for a home or a lost cause? Caleb's restlessness grew, his talk of Chicago louder, his touches tinged with urgency. Eli loved him, but love felt fragile against the town's hate. One evening, Sam showed up at the farmhouse, his face pale. "They know about the group," he said, voice trembling. "Pastor Reynolds is planning a protest." Eli's stomach dropped. The support group was their sanctuary, and now it was a target. He called a meeting, and the group decided to stand firm, planning a public event, a pride gathering small but bold in the town square. The day of the event was crisp, the square lined with a handful of pride flags and nervous faces. Eli stood with Caleb, Sam, and a dozen others, their sign simple: love is love. Pastor Reynolds and his followers arrived, their shouts drowning out Eli's speech. "You're poisoning our town." Reynolds yelled, his face red. Eli's heart raced, but he held his ground, Caleb's hand in his. Then a rock flew, grazing Sam's shoulder. Chaos erupted. Shouts, shoves, the sheriff's deputies stepping in. Eli pulled Sam to safety, his anger boiling over. "We're not the poison," he shouted, voice carrying over the crowd. "You are." A few locals paused, their faces uncertain, but Reynolds's followers pressed closer, their hatred a wall. Caleb drove Eli home, both of them shaken. "This is insane," Caleb said, gripping the wheel. "We need to leave, Eli, before someone gets hurt." Eli stared out the window, the cabin's half-built frame visible in the distance. He wanted to fight, but the cost was mounting. That night, he dreamed of Amos, his voice clear. "Live your truth, kid." But what was his truth? The next morning, Eli found a new letter, not a threat, but a confession. "I was at the protest. I'm sorry. I'm like you, but I'm scared." It was unsigned, but it gave Eli pause. Someone else was out there, hiding, needing hope. He showed it to Caleb, who sighed. "You're going to keep fighting, aren't you?" Eli nodded, and Caleb kissed him, a promise and a plea. "Then I'm with you." But the threats were closing in, and Eli knew the next one might not be just words. The air in Willow Creek grew heavier, like a storm waiting to break. Eli kept the anonymous letter close, its words a fragile thread of hope in a town unraveling. The Pride event had shaken things. Some locals whispered support in hushed tones at the diner, but Pastor Reynolds doubled down, his sermons now a weekly call to cleanse the town. Eli felt the target on his back, but he couldn't stop. Not for Amos, not for Joe, not for Sam. The cabin rebuild became a symbol. Eli and Caleb worked weekends, hammering beams under the watchful eyes of passing trucks. Sam helped, his shy smile brighter each day. Mrs. Carter brought lemonade, and the sheriff stopped by, his presence a quiet warning to anyone watching. But the threats didn't stop. A slashed water line, paint splattered on the new walls. Each act chipped at Eli's resolve, but he kept going, driven by the scorched journal page in his pocket. Caleb was struggling. Eli saw it in the way he stared at the horizon, his dreams of a freer life clashing with the fight they were in. One night, as they lay in the farmhouse, Caleb's voice broke the silence. "I love you, Eli, but this place, it's killing us." Eli's chest tightened. He loved Caleb's fire, his fearlessness, but he couldn't shake the feeling that staying was tearing them apart. "Give me a little more time," Eli whispered. Caleb nodded, but his eyes were distant. The support group grew, a quiet rebellion. Kids like Sam found courage, and parents like Sam's mom started showing up, their faces a mix of fear and pride. Eli organized a second event, a candlelight vigil for Amos, tying his memory to their fight. The town square glowed with flickering lights, pride flags mixed with photos of Amos and Joe. Eli spoke, his voice steady. "Amos taught me that home isn't just a place. It's where you're loved for who you are." The vigil was peaceful, a small victory, but it drew a line. Reynolds's followers picketed the next Sunday, their signs venomous. Eli ignored them, focusing on the cabin, on Sam, on the kids who looked to him for strength. But the threats escalated, a Molotov cocktail thrown at the farmhouse, caught by the sprinklers before it could ignite. The sheriff arrested a local teen, but he wouldn't name names. Eli knew Reynolds was behind it, but proof was a ghost. Caleb's patience snapped. "This isn't a fight, Eli. It's a war." They argued, voices rising in the farmhouse kitchen. "I can't keep watching you get hurt," Caleb said, tears in his eyes. Eli wanted to promise it would get better, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he kissed Caleb, desperate, hoping love could hold them together. The next day, Sam came to Eli, his face pale. "I heard something," he said. "They're planning something big, Reynolds and his group. They're talking about the cabin." Eli's blood ran cold. He called the sheriff, who promised patrols, but Eli knew it wasn't enough. He and Caleb fortified the cabin, boarding windows, setting up lights. It felt like preparing for a siege. That night, Eli found another letter, not a threat, but a plea. "I'm the one who wrote before. I'm in Reynolds' group, but I don't believe what he says. I'm scared to come out. Help me." Eli's heart ached. This was someone trapped, like he'd been. He wrote back, leaving the note in a park bench as instructed. "You're not alone. Meet me at the diner, midnight." He didn't tell Caleb, not wanting to risk him. At midnight, Eli waited in the diner, the lights low. A figure slipped in, a young man, maybe 19, with nervous eyes. "I'm Daniel," he said, voice shaking. "I'm like you." Daniel was Reynolds' nephew, raised in the church, terrified of being found out. Eli listened as Daniel poured out his fear, his shame, his longing to be free. "You can be," Eli said, gripping his hand. We'll help you. But as they talked, headlights flashed outside. Tires screeched, and a crowd gathered. Reynolds's followers, faces twisted with rage. Daniel froze, but Eli stood, heart pounding. "Stay behind me," he said, stepping toward the door. The crowd shouted, their words a blur of hate, but Eli saw the sheriff's cruiser pull up, lights flashing. The crowd dispersed, but not before Reynolds locked eyes with Eli, a promise of worse to come. Eli drove Daniel to the farmhouse, promising safety. Caleb was furious when he learned what happened. "You could have been killed," he said, voice breaking. Eli nodded, guilt heavy. "I had to help him." Caleb pulled him close, their embrace a fragile truce. The cabin stood half-built, a beacon and a target. Eli knew the fight was far from over, but Daniel's courage, Sam's growth, and Caleb's love were worth it. He just hoped they'd survive what came next. Dawn broke over Willow Creek, the sky bruised with clouds. Eli stood in the cabin's skeletal frame, hammer in hand, the scorched journal page tucked in his pocket. Daniel's confession had lit a fire in him. There were others out there, trapped like he'd been, and he couldn't abandon them. But the cost was mounting, and Reynolds's threat loomed like a storm. Caleb was quiet that morning, his eyes shadowed. "We need a plan," he said, helping Eli lift a beam. "Reynolds won't stop." Eli nodded, his mind racing. The sheriff had increased patrols, but the town was a tinderbox. Daniel was staying at the farmhouse, too scared to go home, and Sam was rallying the support group for another event. A march, small but defiant, to claim their place in Willow Creek. The march was set for Saturday, and Eli spent the week preparing. He wrote letters to the local paper, sharing Amos's story, Joe's legacy, his own fight. Some dismissed him, but others listened. Mrs. Carter's niece got her church choir to join the march, and Sam's mom rallied parents. Eli felt hope, fragile but real, even as threats kept coming. A slashed fence, a spray-painted slur on the farmhouse. Each one tested his resolve, but he thought of Amos's note, "Don't let him win." Caleb was his rock, but the strain showed. "I'm scared, Eli," he admitted one night, their hands intertwined in the dark. "Not of them, of losing you." Eli kissed him, promising they'd face it together, but fear gnawed at him. What if Caleb was right? What if staying was a mistake? The march drew a crowd, 50 people, more than Eli expected. Pride flags waved alongside signs honoring Amos and Joe. Sam walked beside Eli, his chin high, while Daniel stayed close, his face hidden under a hoodie. Caleb held Eli's hand, a quiet defiance. But Reynolds's group was there too, their shouts drowning out the marchers' songs. The sheriff's deputies kept them at bay, but the air crackled with tension. Then it happened. A bottle sailed from the crowd, shattering at Eli's feet. Chaos erupted. Screams, shoves, deputies rushing in. Eli pulled Daniel behind him, Caleb shielding Sam. A second bottle flew, and Eli felt a sharp pain in his shoulder, glass cutting through his shirt. Caleb's shout was drowned out by the crowd, but his arms were around Eli, pulling him to safety. The march scattered, but the damage was done. Eli's shoulder bled, a shallow cut, but the Real wound was deeper. At the farmhouse, Caleb cleaned the injury, his hands shaking. "This has to stop," he said, voice raw. Eli nodded, tears falling. He'd wanted to fight, but the cost was too high. Sam's fear, Daniel's trembling, Caleb's breaking heart. That night, Eli made a choice. He gathered Sam, Daniel, and Caleb at the kitchen table. "We're not giving up," he said, "but we need to be smart." He proposed moving the support group to a nearby city, where allies were stronger, where they could rebuild without constant fear. The cabin would wait. It was a symbol, not a home. Home was them, together. Caleb's relief was palpable, his hands squeezing Eli's. Sam nodded, determined, and Daniel, still scared, agreed. They'd leave Willow Creek, not as a surrender, but a strategy. Eli wrote one last letter to the paper, a farewell and a promise. "We're leaving, but we'll be back. Love will always be stronger than hate." The day they left, Eli stood in the cabin's ruins, the key heavy around his neck. He scattered Amos's ashes there, whispering, "Thank you." Caleb joined him, their hands linked, and Sam and Daniel stood nearby, a new family forged in fire. They drove to Chicago, the city's skyline a beacon of hope. Months later, Eli got a letter from Willow Creek. It was from Mrs. Carter, enclosing a newspaper clipping. Pastor Reynolds had been voted out, his church splintered. A new group had formed, led by Sam's mom, to make the town safer for kids like Eli. Enclosed was a photo of the cabin, rebuilt by volunteers, a pride flag flying out front. Eli showed Caleb, tears in his eyes. "We did it," he said, and Caleb kissed him, their love of victory. The fight wasn't over, but they'd carved out a space for hope, for Sam, for Daniel, for everyone who'd come after. And in Chicago, under a sky free of Willow Creek shadows, Eli finally felt home.